The problem with biohackers a lot is that it's magic bullet therapy to them, that they're just trying to find the latest, coconut oil extract or the latest blue blocker thing or whatever goji berry juice extract to squirt up their nose or whatever. They're applying a Western medicine philosophy to a natural intervention. Western medicine philosophy is one cause, one cure. It is symptom-based approach. This is, let's find the one thing that's going to cure this thing. And Western medicine was born legitimately out of military medicine, where the symptom was the problem. If you're on the battlefield, you don't diagnose someone as a field medic with bleeding eye syndrome or missing arm disease. Those are emergency care stabilizing issues that require stabilization. And so Western medicine is born out of the symptom is the problem that requires emergency urgent stabilization. And that is utterly legit in real emergency scenarios.
Welcome back to another edition of your Adrenal Fix podcast, where our mission is to teach exhausted and burnt out adults the truth about adrenal fatigue so they can get their energy back quickly. I'm really excited to introduce my guest and my new friend, Dr. Sam Shay, DC. He helps biohackers and entrepreneurs, mompreneurs, and service professionals increase their energy, resilience, and creativity so that they can create and sustain a great business to create more personal freedom. Dr. Sam, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Joel. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, so listen, most of the health practitioners that we talk to, probably every single one of them have their own personal story, Sam. And I know you have your own health journey starting from 6 to 18 years of age. Why don't you let the viewers know what you've gone through and how you got to where you got to today?
Sure. So my story started really at 6 when I had my first sentient memories, and my family went through a nuclear divorce, as I call it. And my sisters and I were in the blast radius of that pretty traumatic divorce. And that began a cycle of 12 years of a sugar addiction, a video game addiction, and screen addiction, severe insomnia where I had trouble getting to sleep, would wake up at 3 a.m. on the dot and then be woken up by this loud blaring alarm to crawl out of bed to go to a school that I didn't like and was humiliated and assaulted on a regular basis for years. And so it was like a war zone at the house. It was a war zone at school, an emotional war zone at house, not a physical one. And I also had an eating disorder of overeating, but fortunately I had a metabolism of a bumblebee, so it just burned off everything, and was in chronic pain from the injuries from the assaults, as well as sitting all day at school or in front of a television to numb out, and severe bowel issues. Like I had constipation, couldn't go once every 3 to 5 days for 12 years. And I was told that was normal by my parents, who were both medical doctors. And the diet, I had my cholesterol checked at age 7 because they were concerned about my cholesterol, as two medical doctor parents in the 80s are led to believe such things. And my cholesterol was deemed too high for a 7-year-old. And I was put on a high carb, low fat diet, which was probably the worst thing possible for me, based on, I mean, all of these things I say they're harrowing and they're awful and all in collection, and there was, but the flip side of it is I came through the other side having to learn all these other fields in order to pull myself out of this hole. And then genetically, one of those is genetics, and I genetically tested myself for my optimal diet, and I am genetically more of a paleo diet with some keto tendencies. I'm not genetically predisposition towards Mediterranean or a high carb, which some people are. And that was, that's just further detailed discussion we'll have a little bit later on. But for me personally, the high carb diet was a terrible idea for me constitutionally and genetically, on top of literally everything else. So I thought I was going to be a medical doctor. I knew I was going to be a doctor at age 6. I just didn't realize I'd take a sharp turn into natural medicine. And what happened was that in high school, I basically was at a fork in the road, that I'm either going to fix myself or off myself, because this is the depression, the anxiety, the ill health, the the humiliate, like it was just getting too much. And I made the decision to heal myself. And I, with the help of certain mentors and books and just this new vision of learning natural medicine, it gave me hope and inspiration. So I went, I mean, it started at age 16. Was when I really got, I mean, I had the problems for at least another 2 years as I was trying to figure this out. And certain things lasted longer to resolve. But some of the major things really started to turn around. And I went to university and did a pre-med degree, but also did a holistic health practitioner degree in the evenings and weekends while all the other students were having, dramas and drugs. I was learning meditation, going to weekend courses, even took some post-grad stuff at the local acupuncture school while in college, just that things that were open. And then went to chiropractic school after an interim travel period, and just really drilled into nutrition and especially neurology. And neurology I picked as, at the time, was a master subject, because to know neurology, you had to know biochemistry, physiology, anatomy, nutrition, pathology, microbiology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in chiropractic school, we learned about what was called the triangle of health. And the triangle of health uh, was a construct developed in the late 1800s by the founder of chiropractic, D.D. Palmer. And it was at the, trauma, toxins, and thoughts, or stressful thoughts. And at the time in 1895, that's a brilliant model. Unfortunately, today it's a bit simplistic. There's many more things. If you say to someone, "Hey, I'm going to help with your trauma, your toxins, and your thoughts," like that's kind of vague and non-specific. And so what I did is I took that triangle of health and I updated it, false modesty aside, to the 10 pillars of health. So the brain was put right in the middle. And in fact, I'll just put on a visual. Wrong visual. Hold on. I'll just put on. There we go. So the ten pillars. Do you see that, Joel, on the screen there?
Yeah, I can see it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the 10 pillars is it's a circle, and in the center is the brain. And the reason why I put the brain in the middle is because the hypothalamus is arguably the center of the brain, because it interprets, not only location wise, but also it interprets the inputs from biochemical input, physical input, and mental emotional input. And it's the boardroom. It makes a decision about, are we under stress or not? Are we under threat or not? Will we go through an adrenal sympathetic stress response, because are we in survival or not? So the brain was in the middle. And then the physical corner of the triangle, I split into three parts: bowel, body, and burst. Bowel is digestion and absorption. So how well you chew, how well you poo. It's also my sense of humor that it's bowel is pillar number 2, as in going to number 2. So it's a little bit of nerd humor chucked in there for fun. And a lot of people spend a lot of money on good supplements and organic food and other things, but how well are you absorbing it? How well are you digesting it? And are you eliminating the residues that need to be excreted? So the rhetorical question I ask is, like, how long would you live in a house with a toilet that couldn't flush? Not very long. And it's the same thing if you don't eject waste properly. And it's an utter lie, that utter complete lie. It says, oh, if you just poop once every 2 to 3 days, you're fine. It's a lie, total lie. Our Paleolithic ancestors pooped once per large meal, to make room for whatever else is coming through. You have to go every day and eliminate. And it's, if you don't, you get backed up and you create what's called autotoxicity, where stuff leaches back into your bloodstream. And chewing, digestion starts up at the top. Chewing, the cheapest supplement on the planet is simply to chew more. Chew more. That way you absorb what you have. And there's there's neurological benefits. There's all sorts of things. And I know some people listening is like, oh wow, this is real, magic stuff, Dr. Shay. Wow, you're telling us to chew and poop. Wow. It's of course there's many layers deep into the bowel pillar. I mean, there's gut testing, running advanced profiles, like checking for hidden infections, the actual digestion markers. Are you actually digesting proteins, fats, and carbs, etc. But this is just a big picture overview. The third pill, that's bowel. The third pillar is body. Now, body includes several things. It includes untreated injuries. It includes poor posture from people like sitting all day. It includes um, bad dental work. People who have really bad dental work that can ruin your life. And it also includes genetics. Now, why is genetics in the body? Well, look at twins. The reason why they're twins is because they have identical genes. So the genes determine the shape of your body. And genetics is a huge and burgeoning field. And there's people are being, I feel, misled in terms of the efficacy of genes today. And people are chasing after individual genes like people chase after an individual. It's a allopathic Western mindset. There's one cause, one cure. So if I'm a lot of people chase after an individual gene here, an individual gene there. That's not that's allopathic genetics. What I do is called functional genetics, where I don't look at an individual inflammatory gene like interleukin 6 or TNF alpha. I look at 15 genes and I look at major inflammatory genes that are upstream controllers of all the downstream ones. And I look, is there a pattern? Is there a problem with the inflammation pathway as such? Like, is it not just one gene? Is it like 10 or 12 of those genes that are of negative variants on it? And that way I know this person has an inflammation issue, not a specific gene we're chasing after. So it's looking at it from a much bigger lens and then finding out and figuring out based on the research, what are the fewest number of lifestyle interventions that beneficially affect all or most of those rogue genes, as opposed to giving 15 separate things to do. You find the couple that actually influence all the genes. So it's an 80-20 principle, basically, when it comes to genetics. What's the fewest number of genes that require the most amount of attention? And what's the fewest number of interventions that can help those fewest number of important genes? So that's the third pillar, body. Fourth pillar is burst, which stands for burst exercise. It's movement. So those three pillars, bowel, body, and burst exercise, that's the physical section. So it's all movement. It's all the body in different ways. Burst exercise is looking at movement, how too much, too little, wrong type, not enough variety. I don't use the word exercise because that's a real trigger word for certain people, that exercise is laden with guilt or there's not enough time and so on. So I call it like movement. All my pillars begin with a B. So that's why I picked burst, because it was a variant of the term burst. High intensity interval training was burst training. So I have an article on my blog, which I've diplomatically entitled "Why Marathoners Look Like Cancer Patients." And there's, if you talk about adrenals, people who marathon, they have a really high consistent load of cortisol, but they don't get a concomitant release of growth hormone and testosterone to regenerate the damage from cortisol, breaking down tissue. And that's why when you marathon a lot and you train for marathons, that you have a really high chronic cortisol load, which erodes away all your muscles equally. That's why you look gaunt when you're a marathoner, as opposed to high intensity interval training. They look amazing. Like, you just look at any Olympic sprinter and they look 1,000 times healthier than any marathoner. And so I'm a fan of a mixture of movement and high intensity interval training. But there are some genetic variants. Some people are genetically more suited for some more moderate uh, movement patterns. So that's the physical corner. And then the biochemical corner of the triangle is split into three parts: biotoxins, bionutrients, and breakfast. So biotoxins is self-explanatory. It's things that are harmful to your system, whether it's off-gassing, insecticides, pesticides, pollutants in water, air, food, um, things that you absorb through your skin, toxic makeups, toxic uh, things that come off of dyes and whatnot in clothing. Some of the easiest and least expensive things that people can do to improve their health. Like, it's rarely is there any one single toxin that affects people today. It's just this collection and coalescing of hundreds and thousands of different toxins that synergistically wear down the body over time. That's the real issue going on today. I mean, sure, people can have a major exposure, but usually it's like just this collection of all these toxins that just add up, add up, add up, add up, add up. So one of the best things people can do is to look at all the personal and house cleaning products, from dishwashing, washing machine, soaps, surface cleaners, floor cleaners, toothpaste rather, um, uh, skin products, soaps, shampoos, conditioners, and just pay the extra $2 a bottle for the organic and natural versions of them. And also replace all your spices with organic, clean, fresh spices. And spices are, next to organ meat and insects, the highest concentration of nutrients on the planet, pound for pound. So, and the reason why is because they absorb all the minerals and nutrients from the soil in a concentrated form. So if you have inorganic, unhealthy, or spoiled spices, you're taking in a concentrated toxin load. So again, one of the cheap and frankly most delicious things you can do is just simply replace all your spices with really organic, fresh. You can just go to any natural food store, and in fact, most normal food stores have an entire organic spice section, and it's the cheapest supplement you're going to get next to chewing more. So that's biotoxins, and of course, there's advanced labs in biotoxins where they're checking for heavy metals. If people are running an advanced mitochondria test, there's 6 liver pathways checking for the amino acids that are involved in, say, the urea cycle, or the liver detox cycle, checking for heavy metals. There's all sorts of tests, functional tests, that can be done on top of just sheer logic lifestyle interventions. The 6 pillars bionutrients, which is the inverse, and that's everything you need, fatty acids, amino acids, minerals, vitamins. It also includes oxygen and sunlight, which you metabolize just like these other things. And so this is about what we metabolize for our benefit. Oxygen and sunlight are 2 of those. So this is where diet lives, is in bionutrients. And a lot of people get really hung up on the perfect diet to the exclusion of the other pillars. And you'll notice that all the pillars are roughly equal in size. Well, all the outer edges, first 9, the pillars 2 through 10 are all equal size. And the reason I did that is because I've met so many health fanatics that are just so fixated on, no, it's all about meditation, it's all about diet, it's all about exercise, it's all about this, and they become totally imbalanced and one-sided. And I've seen clinically that not everyone's priority is everyone else's priority. There's a balancing act going on, and some people's pillars are higher priorities than others. 7th pillar is breakfast, which is not only eating a good solid starting meal, but it's also about routines, both morning and evening. And I found that some of the sickest, almost unwell people I've ever worked with as a profession have been night shift nurses, because their routines are so thrown off by all this shift work. And it's just as a profession, they are as a general the most unhealthy group of people I've ever worked with, because they get all 10 pillars are crumbling in spades, but the real magic ingredient to screw it all up and exponentiate everything else is that their routines are totally messed up from this shift work. The 8th pillar is bothers, which is, we're now in the mental emotional realm. Bothers, bugs, and bedtime. Bothers is a B word for stress, whether it's uh, marital stress, relationship stress, financial stress, cultural stress, watching the news, clutter. I mean, it's one reason why Marie Kondo has gotten so famous, the life-changing magic of tidying up. Electromagnetic fields, for certain people, they're very sensitive to that. That's a stressor to them. I'm one of them, but not everybody. So for those that it is affected, it's really troublesome, and it's like this invisible thing that you can't explain to people who can't feel it. The 9th pillar is bugs, which is hidden infections and mold. So I developed these 10 pillars back in 2000, like they fully formalized in like 2010, 2011, when I was in New Zealand. And mold central over there. It's tiny islands surrounded by ocean on all 4 sides, and really shoddy buildings. I mean, just terrible. Mold is a killer for up to 25% of the population. It's just devastating. But it's also internal infections, whether they're in the gut or blood or elsewhere. So your if if you have hijackers in your system, it's going to affect you. And don't think for a second that gut infections only happen in third world countries. That's completely untrue. I've run I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of stool tests, people who've like never left the borders of their Western country, and they have hidden infections, you know, and there's things that can be done naturally to help remove the infections, and you can see them removed on post testing, and that they're not there anymore. Then the last pillar, pillar number 10, is bedtime, which is sleep, consistency, duration, depth, quality. And I was a severe insomniac for 12 years. In fact, my next ebook, I'm just finishing up my, at the time of this recording, my genetics ebook. The next book, which will be a Kindle book, will be on sleep. And so having learned everything I've had to learn to come out of severe insomnia, as well as working with clients, is going to be in that ebook. And I can say that um, sleep is probably in modern times the one pillar that is the most chronically sacrificed and least valued, because and sabotaged, frankly, with all, whether it's blue light or deadlines or whatever it is. That's the pillar that's chronically sacrificed. Now, four of these pillars can be sledgehammered, meaning a massive singular event. The physical body one can be sledgehammered with either a literal sledgehammer taking it to the body, or it's a car accident, violence, sports injury, or a fall. Uh, that can crumble the whole edifice. Biotoxin can be a sledgehammer, where you get a massive exposure to a singular toxin that you're uniquely vulnerable to. Bothers, pillar number 8, you can have a major stressful event, whether it's the death of a family member, an illness of a child, a move. A friend of mine's father's house just burned down this week from the fires. Uh, a, whatever it may be, that can be a sledgehammer. And then the pillar 9, bugs, that can be a sledgehammer. A major infection, as we know during pandemic times, that can be a sledgehammer to certain people. So those are the 10 pillars. They were developed working with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, autoimmune, and severe adrenal fatigue patients in New Zealand. And what I found is that uh, people who are chronically unwell had a minimum 7 out of 10 pillars that were crumbling. And the reason why they were chronically unwell is because when you have 7 pillars crumbling and then you try to jump from one protocol, product, or personality to the next, usually most practitioners are really, really good at 1 to 3 pillars, okay at another 2 or 3, and then kind of not really well versed in the other 4. But if you got 7 plus pillars that are crumbling, and you're only addressing 1 to 3 really well and kind of meh on the other 2 or 3, then you're in a problem. You're not going to get fully well. And it's like you sit on 7 tacks and you remove 3 of them. You're technically healthier, but you don't feel any better because there's other things that have to be dealt with. So those are the 10 pillars. And again, they came out of the triangle of health, and they've just been modernized to include everything else. And if you went beyond 10, it gets a bit unruly. I met someone who has 37 pillars or 37 whatever of health, and it's like, good luck teaching that, you know. So those are the 10 pillars. Again, arrived at not just theoretically but clinically, because they were vetted on the sickest of the sick clients that were there in the town I was in New Zealand.
That's quite an intro.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So it all started with me asking you about your background, and I'm glad we delved into the 10 pillars. But I wanted to go back. I'm from a traditional family as well.
Yeah.
And so as far as when you decided, you said at 6 years of age, after going through the nuclear fallout with the divorce and the shrapnel and everything else in between. And then thanks for sharing that as well. I know that's a big thing to have to go through. And then of course you said abuse when you went through school. I'm sorry to hear that, Sam. But at the same time, it's the armor and the battle scars that we take with us that define us and make us stronger, and ultimately has given you the path and the mission to help other people. And I'm really impressed with how well you've organized your 10 pillars. But what I wanted to get into is being from the traditional family of allopathic doctors, like I was as well. How did your parents embrace or not your career choice of being natural, and looking at the whole 10 pillar approach versus, as you and I talked about when we first discussed doing this talk, even the functional medicine doctors or alternative doctors still do the very reductionistic, take this for that, albeit it's a supplement. So the question really is, Sam, how did your parents embrace or not the career choice that you made, given that they were from an allopathic point of view?
Well, it's an interesting question because over time the positions have flipped from when I was originally sharing my intent. So originally, when I shared my intent with my mother, that I was going to be a chiropractor. I mean, really, I was a naturopath disguised as a chiropractor. That's really, it had to do with licensing laws back in the early to mid 2000s. There wasn't a huge number of states that were licensed in naturopathy, but everyone was licensed in chiropractic. And then at the time, for the most part, every state that had naturopathic licensing, the chiropractors had basically the same scope anyway. So why limit myself? And when I told my mother, she screamed at me because when she went to medical school, the only people that went to chiropractic school were those that either failed out of medical school or couldn't get in. And my father at the time thought it was a great idea, even though he's an MD, PhD, and published 2 books on moral injury and trauma. And he discouraged me from going to medical school because he thought that the trajectory of medical graduates was just to be a dispensary for drugs and less time with actual meaningful interactions with patients. And he has a criteria for any procedure. Is it, whether it's natural or medical, is it safe and is it effective? Those 2 criteria, which is a very fair filter. Like, is this safe? Is this effective? And he's had wonderful experiences long term with good chiropractors, and there are, like with any profession, bad ones out there. He said chiropractic falls under safe and effective. Now, uh, what's happened as the years have gone by, my mother has now turned around and is way more open to the functional side of things that I do, uh, and my father, who has since developed dementia, has become extremely resistant to the point of belligerent over doing anything nutritionally or lifestyle wise to help him, because he is very much set in his ways and is preferring his small comforts and pleasures over long-term care, even though he's a famous medical doctor and all the rest of it. It's and it's the ironies are many layers thick, and it's tragic on multiple levels. And I have and the reason my father's become belligerent is because at times belligerent, because I'm coming to him with the 10 pillars model about the things that he can do to help preserve his brain, and he's totally fine supporting me adjust, in his vision of me as a chiropractor. But as soon as what I do conflicts with his small pleasures and his personal preferences and comfort, then suddenly it's affronting, and he gets adamant and obstinate. And it's a form of conditional acceptance, that I will accept your career as long as it's non-threatening to my way of being. And it's a it's probably one of the saddest days of one's life when you realize that if you and your parent are in the same room, that you, the child, are the adult in the room now. That is truly one of the saddest days of a child's life, is realizing you're the adult in the room. And look, again, my father has helped hundreds of thousands of people through his writings and all that. And it's complicated. One can be a hero worldwide and a hypocrite at home. Many things can be true at once. And it's taken me quite a long road to be able to talk about this so kind of calmly. And so just this is what it is, as opposed to me getting pretty upset, as you can imagine, being rebuffed. And because I went out of my way to study all the things to do to preserve brain health. I mean, I had a degree in functional neurology, for Pete's sake, and all these other things. And and to be proactively sabotaged and rebutted against it was quite a learning experience. I have a subspecialty in addiction. I overcome both my addictions, and this is not the discussion to talk about addiction. There's a whole other podcast or 10, honestly. But one of the key, when people come to me, parents reach out to me because I have a specialty in video game addiction and sugar addiction, but parents usually reach out to me for video games. Oh, my son or daughter is addicted to video games and social media, usually respectively. And my first question is, do they want help or do they just need help? And then it's usually followed by very awkward silence and nervous laughter on their part. And they say they need the help but don't want the help. And I said, okay, then I can't help you. I'm sorry. And it's the same thing with my father. If he needs the help, that is for sure. And he's been literally handed everything he needs on a silver platter, but he doesn't want the help. So it's a lesson in acceptance and introspection and coming to terms with someone's life choices, as painful it is to watch, and also to watch the knock-on effects of how it's affecting the family, how his brain decaying affects literally everyone else in terms of his loss of faculties and everything. It's one of the, I mean, a lot of people want to run to the Himalayas and meditate their way to enlightenment and become accepting of all things. I'm like, why do you need to do that? Why don't you just sit in the room with your parents for 5 minutes, see how enlightened you are? That's the ultimate training. So yeah, I think that I chose my career also partly out of solidarity against my medical parents, because it was what the tools at the time were so counterproductive for my state of health, that part of me choosing natural medicine was out of defiance to what the health trajectory that they put me on. Was that the best motive? It was part love of natural and also part, maybe the middle finger at my parents. Was that the best motivator? No, but did it work? Kinda. I mean, it got me where I am today. And now I've resolved, things with my mother, and like we're super close now. It's taken several decades, lots of therapy and real, a lot of hard conversations. And my father, we're still working on things. His ability is a bit decreased with the dementia, but it's a lot more internal work for me now, because he can't stay present with the dementia. And it's tragic on many layers. And for those listening, like, I know for some of you, me talking about these trials and tribulations with my parents may or may not land, but what I encourage people to do who are listening to this, do the work now to try to resolve your relationship with your parents. I cannot tell you how tragic it is to have not started the real work with my father 5 years ago. It is so tragic, because he now wants to, but his brain can't do it. He can't do it. And that is even more painful on some levels than him not wanting to work on the relationship with me at all. I mean, and I hope, does that make sense? Like, just how painful, like this, it's like what could have been, like it was there, but it's not. So, and I do understand truly that some people have fraught, perhaps irreparable relationships with parents, but for your sake, as a child of parents, it's worth doing the work around it, even if they're gone or they're not communicatable with or whatever, you can do the work on yourself, because your parents are the two biggest filters by which you filter the world, mother and father. And we can get all Jungian about this and, archetypes and everything. And there's major truth to it. Resolving one's relationship with one's parents is probably one of the most meaningful and helpful things one can do. And to bring it back to the 10 pillars, that's under pillar number 8, bothers. And, some parents are sledgehammers in one's life when it comes to that pillar. Others are not. So yeah, a long answer to a short question. Yeah.
Well, no, thanks for sharing. And you can definitely see the hero's journey. One thing that I can see that's evident, and a lot of things that you talk about, I want to touch upon, is that you got to practice what you preach, and that's integrity, right? That's having integrity. It's hard for me to have someone give me advice that doesn't walk the walk. And with the parents, I've had the same thing. When my father is going through dialysis, my sister, his daughter, is a real doctor. I mean, sorry, a family, doctor, whereas the chiropractic physician is not the real doctor in his eyes,
Yeah, in
unfortunately.
air quotes, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I went to visit him a year and a half ago, and he was in the dialysis place, and they were serving bread with like Wonder
Can I
Bread,
plug my
enriched,
ears? Can you say
yeah,
that? Yeah.
with margarine, right?
Oh,
And
I'm so
so
sorry.
anyways, so I give my advice, which unfortunately goes in one ear and out the other. And I think that's probably the frustration too, Sam, is not only that he doesn't want to do the hard thing, right? And do the
Yeah.
thing, because it's really the hard thing. And but at the same time, it's not listening to you, and you having the ability to help him when you can. Because I'll give him suggestions in terms of exercise with oxygen, and getting some support for, at the cellular level, being able to get those cells to respire better. And then I'm only met with, which I know it deep down he's not going to do anything about it, but he needs to ask his doctor for if that's okay.
Yeah, I know.
And that gets super frustrating. And I think the lesson in that is really another thing you mentioned, is, which I think is key. And I've told this to a lot of the patients I work with. I will care as much as you will. In fact, probably you won't meet another doctor, unless you're talking to Sam, that's going to care as much as you're going to care. But
Yeah.
I'm not going to care more. I'm not going to care more. I'm not going to drag you in kicking and screaming when you're in a sinking ocean, and I'm sending you the life preserver, and you're kicking and screaming coming in. I'm not going to care more than you. And I love that question, Sam, in terms of, does he want to change? Or, I think
Does
that's
he
great.
want it or need it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's pretty key. As far as switching it up on you a little bit here, your ebook is called Biohacking Your Biohacking, or Biohack Your Biohacking.
Yeah.
So, and I see you have the Aura ring on. I have the Aura ring on. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, I know you have that in your ebook. What exactly is your definition of biohacking? And then let's talk a little bit on, maybe swing into a little bit of the genetics, because I have my ideas and you have your ideas, and I'd love to have a meeting of the minds on that. So first, let's start with biohacking.
Sure. I can literally share the screen and show you it's in the ebook. What is biohacking? It's literally right there.
That
Quote.
wasn't, yeah, set up. That was, yeah,
That wasn't set up. That's why I'm smiling. I was like, well,
yeah,
funny
yeah,
story. Here we go.
right. This
A
will
systemic,
happen. Yeah,
a
yeah.
systemic way of thinking to identify the highest priority pillars of health and implement the smallest and easiest lifestyle changes that will give the greatest results in a meaningful, sustainable way. That's my definition.
Right.
So
Okay.
why the book is called Biohack Your Biohacking, which to biohackers is a cute play on words, and I let them chuckle. Then I look at them very seriously. It's like, no, really, this is what this is about. Because the problem with biohackers a lot is that it's magic bullet therapy to them, that they're just trying to find the latest, coconut oil extract or the latest blue blocker thing or whatever goji berry juice extract to squirt up their nose or whatever. They're applying a Western medicine philosophy to a natural intervention, Western medicine philosophy is one cause, one cure. It is symptom-based approach. This is, let's find the one thing that's going to cure this thing. And Western medicine was born legitimately out of military medicine, where the symptom was the problem. If you're on the battlefield, you don't diagnose someone as a field medic with bleeding eye syndrome or missing arm disease. Those are emergency care stabilizing issues that require stabilization. And so Western medicine is born out of the symptom is the problem that requires emergency urgent stimulus stabilization. And that is utterly legit in real emergency scenarios. The problem is that when we what's the word, when we globalize this philosophy to non-emergency situations, and everything either becomes, it's got to be one thing to fix this one thing, and it's got to deal with it now, and it's only one, let's find the supplement, the surgery, or the radiation to cut it, burn it, poison it, and don't pay attention to anything else that may have caused it, contribute to it, synergized with it, whatever. And this idea of biohacking and just trying to find the best frequency for your laser it can careen into Western medicine magic bullet magical thinking. And now all these biohacks, whether it's the coconut oil, the laser, the lights, the angling your bed to help with drainage, whatever it is, those are all legit tactics. They're tactics, not strategies. And people are confusing the strategy for the tactic. You can use all of those things, but what I'm saying with biohack your biohacking is take the 30,000 foot view first, look at the 10 pillars and figure out what pillar you need to focus on, or pillars. So the amount of energy it takes to, if a pillar is at 80% of integrity, the amount of energy it takes to go from 80 to 90 is the exact same amount of energy, focus, and resources it takes to take a pillar at 20% to bring it up to 80. That's what I mean by biohack your biohacking. It doesn't exclude all these tactics. It just tells you, let's focus on the right pillar to then pick what tactics are most appropriate to build up that pillar in question. That's really what biohacking is about.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree. I like the term data tracking better. And I like the idea that you've put it into different buckets. In fact, when I talk to the people at Aura, as you know, they have the readiness bucket, they have the activity bucket, they have the sleep bucket. So basically you look at it as you have 10 buckets. And really, if you're really the worn and torn biohacker that you say you are, then you really are into numbers and quantification of self. So why not put it in a framework? And I like the idea of 10 pillars. And here's how you quantify it. Certainly, you can have subjective 30,000 view foot symptoms or things that aren't working, like fatigue and brain fog and stress and anxiety. But if we quantify these 10 pillars and be able to data track and come up with the study of one, if you will, of these are some of the parameters that you need to look at, and here's some of the strategies that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I love that. As far as just for yourself, just as a nerd to another, in a nice and loving way, Sam.
That's all right. We'll just do the secret hand signal, just the little nerd thing right there.
Have you really dug into your own Aura numbers, and are you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the tracking, so the way that I totally agree with you on tracking. And so the way that I implement tracking, because the 10 pillars is a, extremely useful, practical construct to be able to organize one's thinking when it comes to one's health, or it's biohacking or otherwise. Tracking is crucial. I mean, the way that I track is I run functional tests. So I let the third party lab. So if we're looking at, say, the brain pillar, which is brain and hormones, so I do like adrenal testing, where it's a cortisol awakening response, or it's a Dutch test or whatever, or you're doing advanced thyroid panels. So I track with that lab in there. That the bowel labs, you run And most of these major, they all have, everyone claims that their poop test smells better, you know, and
Right.
that tracks pillar number 2 and pillar number 9 for bugs, because these stool tests check for infections. Physical body is the entire swath of genetics testing. Burst, that's in terms of testing for tracking for burst, that's things like what's on the Oura ring, whether it's how many steps or levels of intensity and frequency and rest periods and all that. Also on the functional labs, I really check the genetics, because some people are genetically overinflamers, and if they exercise too much, they begin to put on weight because their
Right.
body inflames, and then it retains all this water to dilute all the inflammation. In fact, I presented at a genetics conference on this very subject, on case studies of people who over-exercised and put on more weight, and it turned
Right.
out it was specific genetic combinations that led to them vastly over-inflaming. It was
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Biotoxins, there's plenty of ways to check for numbers, lab tests, whether it's liver pathways or toxins and metals themselves.
Viral
Bio,
panels. Yeah.
genetics, you can do, there's genetic testing to see what your ideal diet constitution is. There's, the advanced mitochondrial lab I run through Genova is basically a micronutrient test anyway, fatty acids, amino acids, it's mitochondrial support, blah, blah, blah. Breakfast and routines, that's Aura Ring. I mean, the Aura Ring, you can track, okay, you say you went to bed at 9:30, but the data says it was actually 11:45. How do you
Right.
square that? And what I found is that on average, people's reported, this is just through me subjectively going through files and, just making notes. People's reported bedtime versus their actual bedtime is off by about 45 minutes. Like
Yeah.
some of the most valuable data I ever got off an Aura Ring or Sleep Cycle. I mean, I've been using Sleep Cycle app for over 3 years. Some of the most valuable thing I ever got with a patient or a client on Sleep Cycle was just showing them when they actually went to sleep over the past month, and completely different from what they reported to me. Not in a
Right.
guilty, shaming way. It was like, look, here's the data. You really want to deal with your fatigue? Let's look at the data. And like, it's inarguable.
Right.
Like, they can't deny that. Um,
Right.
with bothers and stress, I mean, adrenal testing, that's a great way to measure for stress. There's also on mitochondria panels, you can check the dopamine and serotonin pathways,
Sure.
and measure, how much, what your rest periods are with the Aura Ring. And there's other apps out there to track how much time you meditate, or track things like, I don't know. I mean, I use Well World, as one of the main apps clinically for people to track, water consumption, did they meditate, et cetera, et cetera. You can even track
Right.
intermittent fasting.
And
But
it's becoming easier and easier too, which is great,
exactly,
Yeah. Especially
absolutely.
the ring. Yeah.
I love the ring because, one, it's unintrusive. Like, I don't like wearing watches.
Right.
And a ring, like, it's a nice looking ring, and it's not, unless you rock climb or do construction, you can risk injuring your finger, like what happened, I think, to Jimmy Kimmel. He had that sleeve pull thing. So the ring is an unintrusive data tracker, and
You,
yeah, I love
the
it.
thing is, yeah, it's great. As like you, work with people that are exhausted and burnt out, and I find that, and they have that perfect storm of epigenetic factors overlapping with those genetic susceptibilities that create just
Yep,
the
you
train
got it.
wrecks of the world, right?
Yep, you got it.
And
So
and then you get them doing so much data tracking, even if it's automatic, that in of itself becomes very stressful, for having to do like chronometer and then tracking all these things and then being overstressed. But a couple of things I was going to mention to you, and I want to get into the genetics and get your, compare
yeah,
notes sort of. On the burst, I think about nitric oxide in that area. I had a really great interview with Nathan Bryan. He is one of the foremost researchers in nitric oxide. And you talk about first of all, a compound that is just very new in the world of research that isn't on a lot of doctors' radars is nitric oxide. But it really has its hand in every cookie jar of health in terms of oxygenation, mitochondrial health,
Mhm.
You know, he kind of basically broke it down, Sam, in terms of, you know, in basic, simple terms, health is having too much of something you shouldn't have and not enough of something you should have.
Toxicities and
And
deficiencies. Yeah, exactly.
right, and at the end of the day, oxygenation and blood flow is really behind every chronic illness. And nitric oxide. So one of the things I could say is there are nitric oxide strips. You could do that under the burst section in terms of measuring nitric oxide.
Hmm.
But let's get into genetics. So I use another software different than what you use. And I'm sure we're very similar in the way of thinking in terms of if you have some of these genetic susceptibilities, then these are the rocks that you want to look under in your case, the 10 pillars, because these are going to have the bigger domino effects, or they're going to have the bigger hinges that swing doors downstream, if you will. And so what have you found, like in terms of, you've mentioned the over inflamers, or the under firefighters. I don't know what you have for that. What do you have? Is that the same as the over inflamers?
So there, it's actually a yes and. Normally there, it's a two-pack punch. I break it, and yes, I do have a screen share, of course. For So in the way that I address genetics is that the genetics approach that I take is look for four criteria. One is, what are the upstream, there's roughly 25 to 30,000 genes. So how do you pick which ones to look at in regards to health? One is, you want to pick the genes that are related to the drivers of all diseases: inflammation, cell defense, includes free radicals and liver detox, vitamin D utilization, methylation, cardiovascular circulation, and then fat and energy metabolism. So I want to look at genes that are in those seven drivers. Then I would look at what genes are then upstream. So what are there's lots of inflammatory genes, but which are the key upstream ones? Key. Then I want to look for genes that are at least 10% variations, or red or yellow dot, if we're using the red yellow dot system, in at least 10% variations in the general population. So I'm not checking from some super duper obscure 0.00001% variant. That's not useful. It is for the people that it's useful for, but for a general functional genetics thing where I'm taking a member of the population, I want meaningful, likely variations. And then, most importantly, arguably, the fourth criteria is which gene of the remaining genes, which ones have peer-reviewed research done in humans, not wombats or guinea pigs or nematodes or whatever, that show that lifestyle, diet, nutrition alone can change the expression of these genes in a beneficial way. So,
Right.
and then we rank order and look at clusters of problems. Rank order. So inflammation is the top of the heap, because inflammation will control cell defense, vitamin D, methylation. Everyone has a hernia over MTHFR gene, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let's look at the inflammatory genes above it that can, or that really influence how MTHFR expresses. And by the way, the panel that I look at, there's 15 methylation genes we've got to look out for, not just MTHFR, which everyone
It's
just
so far down
severs
their
over.
stream. Yeah. I mean, MTHFR is so far
So
down the
downstream.
stream. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we look at what is the priority, then we look at clustering. I alluded to it before. So this is an example of clustering. This is a left side is one person's cardiovascular grouping, the other right side is another. And when I show this slide to clients, they're like, you tell me which one you're going to worry about. The person with 6 out of 7 green dots, or the person with 6 out of 7 red and yellow dots. And they're like, well, it's obviously that one, the red and yellow dots you're going to worry about. So but if we were chasing after an individual gene, like the AGT here is yellow and this person has 6 other green dots in the cardiovascular system, like, oh my God, they're in trouble. No, when you look at the clustering, they're fine. They're fine. And then conversely, when you look at the other side, there's the NAD, PH, CY, beta A, all this, if you get into genes, you'll kick ass at Scrabble. Like, you'll just get on a first name basis with all these wonderful medical terms. Okay, so if you just look at that one green dot buried over the other 6 yellow and red, like you're going to be led astray saying that, oh my God, this person's cardiovascular is great. No, it's not, because it's got 6 other major genes, red and yellow, surrounding it. So that's an example why I don't chase after individual genes. This is like the best example I could find in my practice of just clear night and day. So in terms of inflammation, like, yeah, inflammation's top of the pile. Inflammation, you can trace back to like 80+% of all chronic issues you can trace back to inflammation. Briefly, just to some people like, oh my God, inflammation's bad. No, it's not. Inflammation it's a yin yang phenomenon. Too much or too little is problematic. What is the purpose of inflammation? And why is it that genetically some people are over-inflammers and not? How could this be? Evolutionarily, I'll tell you. The purpose of inflammation is to heal tissue damage and kill infections. Now, as a hunter-gatherer, and I'm hunting a large animal with hooves, teeth, horns, and fangs and whatever with a tiny stick. I'm hiding with a tiny stick. I'm going to get gored, mauled, bitten, or trampled. And when you get bit, what happens? You have tissue damage and an injection of pathogens at the same time. So inflammation is there to kill the infection and to heal up the wound. So peep hunter-gatherers who had a more exuberant inflammatory response had a higher likelihood of surviving a bear bite. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
This is why we have these variation now in inflammation. Now, to modern times, we don't have, we're not being bitten by bears on a regular basis, So we have this evolutionary holdover, which does not match the current environment we're in. So these over-inflammers are now hyper vulnerable because they're in the wrong environment for which their genes would be an advantage. So when people are over-inflammers, there's actually 3 issues involved. One, they over-initiate, which means that instead of a little Bic lighter of inflammation, it's a bonfire, or it's chronically perpetuated. They're over perpetuators, or they're under clears. I mean, you talked about firefighting. There's literally the image of a firefighter versus a squirt gun. So if you've got squirt guns on patrol, these are the interleukin 10s in general that are the anti-inflammatory genes.
Keep 1, 2 as well would be ones as well.
Yeah, I mean my understanding of interleukin 1s is that they're also part of the initiation cycle as well.
Yeah.
So
keep they are as well. But I don't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
No, it's genes they're complex, they're situational, like all these things. Just for as a clean example, we'll just stick to the interleukin 10s as anti-inflammatory, just for simplicity's sake. But so here's an example, a client of mine where she was an over-initiator, an over-sustainer, and an under-clearer all at the same time. So this is the same woman that she got a new exercise coach who's one of these, I'm going to sound as nice as I can, over enthusiastic trainers from the CrossFit ilk who thought
no
that
pain, no gain. No pain,
no
no
pain,
gain.
no gain BS. And she put on weight, lost her muscle tone, and her hormone cycle got all messed up. Okay. And what happened is that she was not only she's an over-inflamer, an over-sustain. Now, what's interesting, all 3 of her CRP genes, which are the acute phase inflammation genes in her liver. So her liver got way more affected by the inflammation in terms of overwhelm. And then on her detox genes, she had some she had some variations regarding estrogen in 3 separate meaningful spots. So what happened is that she got overinflamed from the over-exercising. It particularly affected her liver. And then she couldn't clear estrogen properly because her liver was busy dealing with all the inflammation. Right. So what I did for her, aside from having some few choice words with her, we'll call him a trainer, the few choice words for that trainer is that I put her anti-inflammatory diet, lifestyle, supplements, and estrogen liver detox supports, and cutting back significantly on her training, making sure there's at least 1 full day of rest, at least, between each training session. And her muscle tone returned, her dropped her weight, and her cycle is normalized. So this is a classic example of kind of the triad of over-initiation, over-sustaining, or over-propagation, and under-clearing. And you want to talk about demoralizing? Let's talk about someone, the more they work out, the fatter they get. That is utterly demoralizing to somebody. So some people just come to you defeated, just defeated that they
Right.
can't lose the weight. And it's really an inflammation issue.
Yeah. Well, I'll say a couple of things in the trainer's defense, because I was a trainer for many years.
Yeah.
Sacred cows are being toppled now with more research,
Good.
and they're only doing what traditional approaches have told you, like the same kind of concept where I can't tell you how many times I hate to admit when I first started, and even this is with an exercise physiology degree and a certified strength and conditioning specialist, which is no BS certification.
I
It's
believe
really
you.
hard to actually. Yeah. Hey, small meals more frequently. That's what you do. And that's you get that out of the textbook. But again, genetically speaking, maybe you're not lowering blood glucose to the point where it never really gets that low anyways, but it's constantly stimulated. Anyways, it's new paradigm shifts that we're learning now, and we're being able to digitally customize for each client that we work with. There are nuances and understanding the perfect storm. One of the things that got me in trouble, though, Sam, I would say, is I know, and I do genetic testing on all the clients I work with, and we have the same similar concepts in terms of over initiation, over sustaining, under clearing. But some of the challenges could be is where the epigenetic factors overlap with some of the gene SNPs that may not be on our radars because they're not polymorphic. Meaning in English, like we tell people, hey, if you have a homozygous SNP, instead of a nice 8-lane highway, it's 2 lanes. And if you have a heterozygous SNP, instead of an 8-lane highway, it's 4 lanes. And if you have no polymorphisms, it's 8 lanes. So you don't look at the 8 lanes. Oh, the 8 lanes must be traveling fine. But there could be a tractor trailer spilt out in the middle of the highway, and that's inflammation, right? And so even if that person on that left-hand side doesn't have those polymorphisms, they still probably are having major challenges in all 3 areas because they're so overinflamed anyways, right? So
Correct. And
do
you
you
brought up a
find,
very,
yeah,
you're absolutely right. And so this is why, like I made this slide showing the traffic light that even if someone is a green dot
right,
and they have a bad lifestyle, knowingly or unknowingly, they can careen into a red-ish territory. I mean, your
right,
genes will not change unless you're dumb enough to inject CRISPR, but the expression can be changed on a dimmer, like a
right.
dimmer switch. And so people who
Dimmer-
have green dots, they don't. I've had precious few clients that have done their genetics where I had gene envy. Like, wow, that is the biggest sea of green I've ever seen. And but some of them are in really bad health. And when I
Yeah,
come to them and I
right,
say, okay, they're like, wow, my genes are great. It says, yeah, and here's the bad news of that. What you're going
right,
through is utterly self-inflicted, and you can't blame your
right,
parents on this one. And
right.
like
It's
you
so
can't blame your
true.
parents. Yeah. So you're totally right. There can be made. That's why I mean, when it comes to genes, like that's why I look at priorities. Like, if you're worried about cardiovascular system is way down the pike because you can look at inflammation, methylation, detox, vitamin D receptor, like there's all these things that can then really influence the meaningful cardiovascular
Yeah,
circulation system. And,
right.
um, I say when people look at the big picture of where do genes fit in on, I'm looking at the wrong slide deck here. Hold on one second. Actually, before I go to that other thing, I just wanted to show like the 3 types of weight gain. So genetically, I look for 3 main weight gain types. The main one is inflammatory water weight. That's the one where you ever had seen someone eats a muffin and they put on like 4 pounds? Like even though, unless that muffin was last Christmas's fruitcake, it didn't weigh 4 pounds, right? So how did they gain 4 pounds? And it's because the muffin inflamed their body so much that they held on to water to dilute the inflammatory chemicals in order to so that buy time for the liver to filter them out. The other type of genetic based weight gain I've seen is hormonal toxic weight, where they have issues and SNPs in their detox pathways, and so the body will throw toxins into the fat cells, or what I call the dirty closets of the body, just to like get it out of circulation. And then the third way is caloric fat weight, which is what people typically think of as, oh, if I eat calories equals weight gain, which you and I both know is so outdated. And the vast majority of weight gain I see today is inflammatory water retention weight.
Right. I would say also too hormonal, like, because we talked about, you touched upon it in terms
Mhm.
of these advantageous genes 100 to 200 or even longer ago are actually the least healthy genes in today's day and age. And that's mainly because of how crappy and toxic our environment is.
Yeah.
And what used to be advantageous in the past is no longer advantageous now. So, hey, listen, I appreciate all the time you're giving me here, Sam. What I usually like to do is when I'm asking sort of my ending question, I ask my guests this question. And again, we will, if you're up to it, I would love to do part 2 and part 3, because I
Sure.
think we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg here. But with that being said, knowing what you know now, and it's a harder question to ask someone like yourself who walks the walk, who's been through the trials and tribulations on their own, has had to come up with these 10 pillars to ultimately, whether you knew it or not, help yourself first so that you could help all these other people that you're helping. It's a bit of a skewed question to ask you, but what would you do now, knowing what you know, or tell the old Sam, or the young Sam, the long time ago Sam, that would have had the biggest health impact on the adrenals per se, because that's what my topic is overwhelm, stress, exhaustion, HPA axis dysfunction, continuing of inflammation, crappy firefighters, mine, 10 pillars, all of the above. I'm interested to hear your answer on that. So what would the seasoned Sam tell the young Sam? What would have been the best piece of advice, do you think?
In regards to adrenals,
In regards to just overall functioning, overall feeling great, being healthy, having energy, lots of vitality. I mean, just in overall body health, or even words of wisdom for anything, you know?
so what will be the single biggest mover? So, as a child who's not in charge of his own agency with his health, back in the 6 to 18, when I got into teenagers, I had more agency. The single most important thing that could have changed my life was data gathered by a skilled and caring and competent clinician. That wasn't, that opportunity was not given to me. And if I had me, I mean, this sounds kind of self-referential, but if I had me as my clinician back then, it would have cut decades of strife and struggle and heartache and backache off, my timeline.
But
And
would you have been willing, or would you have needed it, or would you have wanted it?
I wanted it. It was my parents who didn't want me to go see to other, that's the issue, is that the single most important thing you can do is to want the help. That's bar
Right,
none, because you can't do anything without that.
right,
Putting that aside, the most important thing that someone can do is to work with a skilled, experienced, competent, caring clinician. Because as a layperson, if you're listening to this, you don't know what you don't know. And what's worse is what you think you know to be 100% true in all cases. That I forget the fancy term. It's not what we know that puts us in danger. It's what we think we know that is unchanging is most dangerous.
right.
I'm butchering the quote. I don't remember
All
who
right,
said
right. I get what you're saying. It's like the George Costanza approach. Just kind of do the opposite to what you
it.
think is the real
Right,
way of doing it.
right. So that's work with a clinician that relies not on their ego or their precious model, but that relies on the science and the data. What I call functional medicine, it's functional medicine, It's the best of Western medical medicine diagnostics with the best of natural medicine lifestyle interventions. We can use all the wonderful science and toys and diagnostic tools of Western medicine, science and technology, yet implement based on data what is the most effective natural lifestyle interventions based on data. And that is the best marriage of East and West that I have found today, whether it's genetics, stool tests, adrenal tests, mitochondria, doesn't matter. It's the same approach. Lifestyle plus science, you'll get the best result you can under supervision. It's really a fraught universe out there where people can listen to 5 podcasts and think they're an expert. You know, it's nuts. And
Right.
uh, yeah, work with the experts, and
Yeah.
ideally someone who has been through something parallel or similar to what you've been through.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. And I think even too, the clinician has to be humbled enough to know what they don't know as well, right?
Yeah.
And admit it, because aren't you overwhelmed with knowing, oh my gosh, when there's something that just gets on your radar, or just when you think you know how to help someone, they'll send that really tough client to you that has a crazy storm going on with them, and it's very
Uh-huh.
humbling.
You mean
And
Tuesday?
then yeah, then you learn, like, okay, I don't know all there is to know, but I'm willing to get a battle scar out of this, like we talked about,
Why we
so that
call it
I
a
can,
practice. This is why we call it a practice,
yeah,
man, you know?
right. But they have to be willing to admit that, because if the doctor says they know it all,
No,
that's where
run,
you gotta
run,
run, you
run,
know?
run, run, run. I mean, my what
Yeah,
I work with clients, when I run labs, I always make sure there's a second pair of HIPAA compliant, of course, second pair of eyes on the lab. So like I'm good. I when I do lab packages with people, it's almost always a minimum adrenal, gut, and mitochondria test, and then you kind of layer on top of that. So it's like I look at the labs synergistically, and then I go to the niche experts like, okay, you've been studying this hormone test for 20 years. Here's what I see in it with the case study, et cetera. Am I missing something here? Because you've looked at these
right,
tests for a decade longer than I have, you know, but
right,
they haven't looked at all the other tests. Like I'm like
right.
the quarterback. So
Well, you also have the 10 pillars too, right? So
correct.
you
I
would
have the
also,
10 pillars. I have the 10 pillars. I have all the other labs of the entire, but I talk to the lab experts on the specific niche labs also after reviewing, just to, you know, for lack of a better phrase, double check my homework. You know, if people are going to
right,
invest in functional testing, I certainly would want an additional pair of expert eyes on this thing. No, so when
right,
people work
right,
with me, they're not just working with me, they're working with an entire team that they don't talk to or see, because
right,
I've got all these mentors and lab scientists behind me that I cross check all the labs. And
right.
that is where the true learning happens and the true humility happens, because it's like, oh, I didn't realize that a 2 standard deviation difference between phenylmalate and homovinylate was actually a copper deficiency. I didn't read that anywhere,
Right.
you know? So
Yeah. Or vitamin C or DBH or Clostridia, all those things would happen as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that happens a lot. Just as a quick aside, in terms of,
Mhm.
I've been finding a lot of iron oxidation, iron transportation, iron utilization, iron absorption, copper availability, vitamin A processing, all of that will adversely impact iron. Are you finding, just as a clinical pearl before we check out here, that being a really relevant finding with the clients that you're working with these days in terms of just how well they're using oxygen and iron?
So when I run oxygen studies, when I run iron studies on clients, and so like for example, like I run like the Genova's, you know, ion panel, and you get the add-on with the thing with it puts the iron and some thyroid markers and all the rest of it. When I'm looking at oxygen, I'm thinking oxygen and iron as part of the journey to mitochondria. To me, the endpoint is mitochondria, not the iron or oxygen itself. And so when I'm looking at someone with mitochondrial issues, iron is a huge part of that because you can't biohackers don't work unless the oxygen gets there, and the iron is the transport mechanism to get there. And if someone's dealing with some iron issues, um, there's a whole multitude of things, as you know, that can go wrong. One of my favorite tricks to help people, recommendations to help people with their iron levels is to find a clean, organic, I know it sounds odd, tasty source of liver, because you get the vitamin A and the iron and all the copper and you get all the nutrients basically you need for iron from eating liver. And there are now liver pills people can take. I mean, we learned at Mindshare about this guy who's creating a spice, like a spice mix that has organic, like ground up liver and organ meats in it. And it tastes good, so people can get their organ meat from like a spice mix.
Right.
Um, and that's uh, and of course there's other things you got to check for, like intrinsic factor, like you got to check their stomach, you got to check their digestion, all these other things as well. What I'm finding, when people are having difficulty absorbing, one of the most overlooked things that I have found in practice is people's specific amino acid deficiencies. So when I run like an ion panel, it actually puts the amino acids in a 5 quintile distribution. So anyone who's in first quintile or lower of an essential amino acid like lysine or glutamine or whatever, to me, my priority is let's get the essential amino acids up first, because they're the core of building of, everything. And then maybe the whole other absorption issues will sort itself out, because now they do have the tissue foundation to actually absorb it. And like with all functional medicine, everything can, like, everything can cause and feed everything also. But I would, if someone had a meaningful iron issue and an essential amino acid deficiency also, then we deal with both at the same time.
Right.
We're not
Yeah.
chasing magic bullets here.
No, absolutely. So one of the clinical pearls I learned recently, Sam, is the fact that iron metabolism versus iron deficiency. Because in the same person, you can have what is absolutely an iron deficiency, but they're not iron deficient in their body. It's not getting out of tissues. It's not being transported out of
Yeah.
tissues. It's oxidizing and it's creating hydroxyl radicals and it's depleting those that are weak firefighters. And then they yell at the deaf person louder and they're taking more iron, and they're not necessarily fixing where the iron is being improperly metabolized. I find that to be hugely problematic, more so than I have ever anticipated. And I think, unfortunately, what feeds that is the crazy distribution of lab ranges of ferritin from like 30 to 390 on the
Oh yeah.
function on the lab ranges. It's just, anyways, we can geek out about that on another podcast if you're
You're
willing
right.
to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's and what's there are meaningful discrepancies between ranges on different labs. I mean, all you have to do is look at pancreatic elastase, and one lab says over 200 is normal, another says over 350 is normal, and this is over 500 is normal. And
Right.
like
Right.
this happens, and the reason why is because the labs base their numbers on the population normals that they sample from.
That took it
And
there. Yeah. Yeah.
and so how they get to these numbers is how they get to these numbers, and so that's where you get the discrepancies.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where having a clinician, not just ordering the test yourself, matters, because as a clinician, we look at lots of labs from the same types of labs from different labs themselves, and we have the full clinical picture, whether it's the 10 pillars of health or some other model. And it's really important that to kind of go back to work with a well-trained, skillful, caring clinician, because the lab numbers are not always the lab numbers you think they are, because the lab normals can vary from lab to lab.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome stuff, Sam. What I will do is I will post the links to your free report, as well as maybe you can just give us a little. You mentioned that you have, when we talked a little bit earlier, you have your own course.
Mhm.
That's something that they could do for themselves. Can you give us kind of the elevator kind of explanation on what that is?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have an online course for the 10 pillars of health. I mean, it's called End Adrenal Fatigue, with the 10 pillars of health. And I go into the 10 pillars of health in great detail, describing each one, meaningful, actionable things you can do for each one, understanding them, how you can assess where you're at. And it's a self-paced online course. There's no grades, there's no tests. You can just watch. You can watch a full explanation of the pillars in detail, and this way, it's people should get it not just because they have a health concern. They should get this course because once you learn the 10 pillars, you can literally contextualize everything you have ever learned in natural health, that you ever have learned and ever will learn, because now you can slot all these tidbits, tactics, clinical pearls, whatever, into their respective pillar. And you're no longer chasing magic bullets, you're just adding them to their respective parts. So now you can organize your thinking from that point forward on everything you ever learn and have learned in natural health. And that's the really important reason to get it, even if you're not, quote, fatigued or adrenal fatigued.
Right. I always say, like, a lot of the same pillars, the same 10 pillars. I don't say it necessarily in that way,
Yeah,
but
sure. Yeah,
the
yeah.
same challenges that are happening at the cellular mitochondrial level are happening for most, or if not all, chronic illness. It's just, where are the weak links in the chains breaking downstream?
Yep.
In some people it's fatigue, other people it's brain fog, other people it's insomnia, weight loss resistance, or all of the above. And the other thing I wanted to say just before we end is, I appreciate sharing your information today. You've been completely transparent, but also the fact that you said it when we talked the other day, is we look at abundance and not scarcity, because I help people that have adrenal issues. You help people that have adrenal issues, and together we help people that have adrenal issues. You
Mhm.
have a way of looking at the stage from a different angle. I have a way of looking at the stage from a different angle, and
Mhm.
together you see a more complete picture.
Mhm.
And I hope that's what we accomplished today, Sam.
Oh,
I do
definitely.
appreciate your
Absolutely.
time for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate your generosity in having me be on your podcast. I love sharing this content. At a minimum, I wish I had learned this, 30 years ago. And we're both, doctor is old French for teacher, and the real job of a doctor is to, a real doctor is to teach so that our job becomes unnecessary. And we have the benefit of things like podcasts and online courses that we can easily scale knowledge in a meaningful and just sustainable way. So thank you for what you're doing, and you're really fulfilling your role as teacher with this podcast, not this one specifically, but your podcast as a whole. So thank you for the mission that you're doing to help teach everyone about natural health.
No, I appreciate it. And we'll to be continued. We'll
We
sign
continue.
off as a to be continued. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Sure.